Hello again and welcome back to Flipped, where I take soul samples and flip them into something that we can all vibe to. My name is Kyle, but I make all my music under the name BAP. If this is your first time here, welcome. Big shout out to you. Thank you for pulling up. And if you're interested, I'm in all of these places, so feel free to tap in with me over there as well. All right, so this is episode 3, and today we're going to take a sample that I made called Greater Good, and we're going to flip it into a beat called Take Me Home. Let's get it. Okay, so some weeks back, I made a sample called Greater Good. It's a bit of an aggressive composition in E flat minor. Wait, is it E flat minor? Hold on. Yes, it's E flat minor. So inside this sample, you'll hear a Fender American P Bass kind of keeping the low end grounded. You'll hear a Rhodes carrying the foundation of the progression. The UDO Super 6 is doing a couple different things. First, there's a warbly pad with some modulation and some movement to kind of make it feel really haunting. There's also an arpeggio that's giving the sample a little bit of extra rhythm and like keeping it sort of mysterious. There's some stabs on the Yamaha U1, and there's kind of an emotional, whiny synth lead part that's being played in two places, both on the Korg MS-20 and on a flute, which lives inside the Mellotron plugin by Arturia. If you'd like to see piece by piece how I put the sample together, be sure to check out this video. All right, let's listen to the sample. So in the first 2 episodes of this series, I started the flip by chopping the entire sample. So this time around, I took a little bit of a different approach, and instead of chopping the entire sample, I pulled in a few of the stems from the sample and just chopped those up to create something new. So a little bit of a quick background on me. I started flipping samples when I was 17, which I honestly can't believe I'm saying this, but that was like 20 years ago. I mean, like at that time, I never really had access to like individual stems, and I just didn't know enough about like EQ and how to remove instruments or frequencies from full composition. So I would only ever flip like the entire composition of like full instrument pieces. Like I would be looking for moments in a song that had like a really nice progression. Now, as I got older and more experienced, I would look for samples that featured like a single instrument. Like for example, like if I had like a record I were flipping through, I might skim through just the intros of the songs to try and find like a guitar lick or a Rhodes pass and use that as my starting place. Since I started composing my own samples a couple years ago, it's nice because now I always have access to the individual instruments in case I want to like take this approach and start with a specific instrument to build around. Now, if you take this approach that I'm talking about now of taking the individual stems and compare that to what I talked about in the last 2 episodes of taking the entire sample and just chopping that into quarter notes, the benefit of that approach for me is being able to flip the sample, recontextualize it, but also keep it familiar to the listener. With this approach, I'm not really concerning myself with keeping it familiar at all. I'm just throwing the doors of creativity just kind of wide open and just seeing where it goes. So that being the case, once I decided to take this approach, I ended up taking the bass, the Rhodes, the piano, the synth lead, and the arpeggio, and I chopped all of those up. Now I'll bring these in one by one so you can hear how they all kind of work together. I also mixed a couple of these for effect as I went along. I added a sub to the bass and a ping pong delay to the synth lead. So I'll show you that as well so you can hear how that sounds. Oh, but before I do, I should mention that I very rarely leave samples in the same key. So I actually took everything and pitched it up 1 semitone. So if you're hearing it, it's no longer in E flat minor, it's gonna be in E minor. Okay, let's take a listen. Amazing. So now that the sample is in a really, really good place, it's time for my favorite part of the show. The drums. It's not prize picks. It's the drums. So I program these drums with a combination of one shots and loops. And again, I'll bring these in one at a time so you can hear what they sound like. Now, to me, this sounds pretty good, but I knew that this was only a starting place, and for where I wanted to take the track, I was going to need to bring the drums to life a little bit more. So I employed one of my favorite techniques. Drum roll, please. Parallel compression. Now, you probably are, but if you are not familiar, parallel compression, which apparently is also called New York compression. I didn't know that until recently. Parallel compression is a technique where you blend a heavily compressed version of a track with the original uncompressed version of the same track. This allows you to kind of keep some of the natural dynamics of the uncompressed version while blending in a lot of power and sustain and punch from the really heavily compressed signal. It is a really great tool to keep in your toolkit, and it is amazing on drums. It's amazing on vocals. And if you don't go too crazy, it can even sound really, really good on a full mix, to just add a lot of life and character back into your full mix while also still retaining that natural quality of your mix. You can think of parallel compression like making a smoothie. Let's say the original track is like fresh fruit that will go in the smoothie. It's vibrant, it's natural, it's full of texture, it's got like the fleshy part of the fruit, it's got the seeds, got the pulp. It's all the kind of dynamic substance you would want for your smoothie. Think of this as your uncompressed signal, dry, just raw. And then there's the heavily compressed signal, which is kind of like taking some of this natural fruit and blending it into like a really thick puree. Now, if you only had the puree, it might be too uniform, too heavy. And if you only have the fruit, then you're just eating dry fruit. It's really not a smoothie. But when you blend the two together, you get the best of both worlds. You get the fresh bite and the substance of the fruit with the smooth richness of the blended version. And voila. That is what parallel compression does. It kind of thickens up your sound without you losing that original character. So in today's music software, a lot of the plugins that are on the market today have parallel compression built right into the plugin, which is like really dope. Now, I'm slightly more old school, and I like to have a little bit more control than what might come in a single plugin. So I like to set up my parallel compression through the routing system of my DAW, which is Luna by Universal Audio. Let me show you what that looks like. So here you can see all of my drum tracks, the kick, the snare, the claps, the shaker, the bongos, and this little like flex tool. All of those are being routed into two other tracks, a dry drums track and a wet drums track. Now the dry signal has like very minimal processing through this SSL channel strip plugin. It's like some light EQ, some compression with a little mic pre emulation. Nothing too crazy. The wet signal, however, has both a compressor and a saturator on it, and both of those are being pushed pretty hard. Now I'll introduce the dry signal first so you can hear it. Then I'll bring in the wet signal so you can hear them both together. And then I'll just solo the wet signal so you can hear what that sounds like. And then I'll bring them both back in again so you can kind of hear all the differences. And that is parallel compression, at least according to me. Now, there are a bunch of ways to do this. Find the way that works the best for you, obviously. Now, at this point, I felt really, really good about how the sample and the drums were coming together, but I didn't feel good enough to just leave it there. Again, I wanted to take this track somewhere. So I had to add a few things to give it a bit more attitude and kind of push the intensity even further. So I added some stomps and a crowd chant. The combination of these kind of hard hitting things along with the drums, which aren't doing anything really syncopated, it should kind of like make everything feel really tough and just kind of nasty. And really cinematic and bold. Yeah, I like it. I think it's gonna get there. So after dialing in the mix a little bit, there's really not a whole lot more to do. Really just some minor mastering adjustments, some EQs, some saturation, stereo width, some compression, and some leveling. And that's it. So with this track, we explored a different approach than in the previous 2 episodes. Instead of chopping up the entire composition of the sample, we took some of the individual stems that make up the sample and we chopped those up. Now, the original sample had a lot of attitude, so it kind of just made sense to follow that wave. The sub underneath the bass is really carrying the low end and the grit of this track. But I think it's really beautiful in music when there's balance. The Rhodes and the synth lead are just kind of riding a little bit of a wave. They're really smooth to kind of counter that grit and that power that we're getting from the bass. And the arpeggio is just kind of pulsing to give the sample some bounce. Now the drums are really punchy, really smacky, very in your face. And the stomps and the crowd noise just kind of take it where it needs to go in terms of intensity. Kind of reminds me of like Anthony Edwards like dunking on somebody, but there's also like tension and anticipation. It kind of reminds me of like maybe like Huey Freeman and Riley Freeman gearing up to take on Uncle Ruckus or something. So by now, you know how this goes. I'm gonna hit play and let the track take us out. And while we're jamming, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can be sure to meet me back here. Hey yo, and I can't tell you how much I really appreciate you stopping through and rocking with me. Big salute, thank you to all the new subs and all the subs that have been rocking with me for a while I try and figure out this content thing. For real, thank you. Man, I really hope this video added some value to your day and some inspiration to your music journey. Man, I love sampling, man. And in the words of one of the greats, Kate Renata said, "We cannot let this sampling die." So if y'all keep showing up, I'll keep showing up too. That's it. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.